saw in the film clip here, Dr. Torrey, a psychiatrist, is saying that great strides were being made in the Carter years with a genuine humanitarian effort to try to help the mentally ill. And in the process, they felt that one of the major answers was deinstitutionalization of the patients. And I think in a matter of a year or two, 400,000 people were released from the institutions. Now, certainly from a standpoint of overall picture, that looks terrific. But what were some of the side effects that resulted from this program?
Well, the problems were that the funding wasn't in the community for good programming. And there wasn't good follow-up. Some of the people would get lost in the cracks, and they wouldn't get followed up. And some of them have ended up becoming our homeless.
And that's tragic.
It is.
Because it is, you know, the other thing, I feel, I'm certainly not trying to speak as an expert, but because I have been the recipient of some marvelous tapes, videotapes, as well as from CNN News, it has brought the matter more to the fore. And when you spoke about the homeless, as the funds were released from institutional care into other avenues, there were people already figuring how they could minimize the funding for these programs. And if there was no care, so much more money was saved.
Yeah, it seems to me, from what I've understood, the community program should cost as much as the hospital program. So it shouldn't be thought as a cost-saving measure.
Well, and the other thing that we discussed just a little while ago, when you think of the time lost on the job, when you think of the millions of dollars with absenteeism or hospitalization required because people waited too long to say, yes, I'm in need of medical help, one would think that employers would get smart and feel that they are to a point where they say, money is committed for this because it will save us money in the long run.
That's right, and I think that because it strikes in the prime of people's lives, more money should really go to research because, again, we don't get the money that cancer or these other illnesses do get. And I think some more research into these areas would be preventative and really save money.
Oh, that reminds me of something else, Dr. Sullivan. You're really terrific. When you said you don't get as much money in research as the other major illnesses do, yet mental illness fills more hospital beds than any of these other diseases. So it's kind of a paradox,
I
isn't
think
it?
I've heard 30% of all our hospital beds, yeah.
Oh, that's terrible. What is the good news in mental health? What progress can you identify for us?
The good news is probably some of the research that's going on. And I think even the advocate groups, the Alliance for the Mentally Ill, the Mental Health Association in Michigan, I think there's been a real gelling of the public, and it's kind of almost anti-stigma. It's been good. Mm-hmm. And they kind of know where the pulse is. They're organized, they're going to Washington, asking for funds. They're holding hands with the professional community. There's been a real collaboration.
You know, you've just said a great buzzword to me, collaboration, because I think so often we don't have that feeling that the medical profession is or wants to collaborate with the patients or an advocacy group. Do you also feel perhaps that there have been no real lobby groups for the mentally ill because people were reluctant to come forward?
I think so. I think with the Jerry Lewis telethon, you have people that have mostly children that come forward in the family. And we've always, in our field, would have liked to have somebody that's well-known step forward and have something like a Jerry Lewis, you know, somebody that's famous and would come out of the closet.
Mm-hmm. And that hasn't happened yet.
Some have done it, but we would like more of it.
When we were talking about what progress has been made, Has the ability of the computer looking into our bodies done anything to help perhaps find that marker, as you said, the cause of mental illness?
Well, there are some exciting things with computer imagery of the brain, CAT scans and so on. And incidentally, they're using computers also for diagnosis, but the exciting thing is to find a biological marker, something that'll make this a real illness to people.
Have you been able to view that visually, that perhaps there is some, or are some parts of the brain that are different?
It looks like it. The techniques are new, the studies are new, and we have to wait a little longer. They're so exciting, you'd like to jump right on the bandwagon, but you have to be a little more disciplined and wait for, hopefully, this next decade will hopefully be a good one for us.
Now let's talk about your position. You are the acting director of Lafayette Clinic. What function does Lafayette Clinic serve to the community?
Well, we serve all the age groups from child through geriatric. We have inpatient and outpatient programs. And we train all different types of mental health professionals. And, you know, I was mentioning research. We have 90 research projects ongoing.
And these are funded by various groups or the state of Michigan?
Funded, well, the seed money comes from the state of Michigan, but there's a lot of federal money. I think half of our 90 projects have outside funding. Some from drug companies, some from the feds.
What are some of the exciting research projects that you're doing?
There's a lot of drug studies going on. I think next week they're having a treatment-resistant depression, an international meeting in Philadelphia. And our two geriatric psychiatrists are going, each with a different paper. In older people, when they get depressed, and a lot of them get depressed, we haven't been able to use lithium, which has been helpful for the younger person. One of the papers will be to show how to use lithium in the older person. And there's another drug that's been used with people with brain dysfunction, and as you get older, you might get a little hardening of the arteries and so on. There's a drug that's been used for that. Now we're using it for depression, and it's working in the elderly. So we're trying to sort out two different kinds of depression in the elderly, and we're finding here are two new drugs that seem to work for certain groups.
Oh, that's encouraging.
That is encouraging.
Because here our major part of our society will be the older group as well, won't it? I mean,
that's right.
Not too many years.
We're doing a lot of behavioral modification, psychological work. One interesting study, the people that have what's called Raynaud's disease, that's when the blood doesn't quite get down to our toes and fingers, and they can't stand this climate in the winter. We take them and they learn how to control their blood flow. And we've had a 90% improvement rate.
And with biofeedback?
Biofeedback, and they don't have to go to Florida in the winter.
Not bad. Well, that is interesting. Yeah. Having the mind be a part of the treatment then.
That's right.
I mean, in this respect. You know, when we were talking about funding, how does the state of Michigan rank in its approach to mental illness as well as the funding part?
Okay, I think there was a group that came out last week and said we ranked, I think, 42nd or 43rd. It's somewhere in there. It doesn't sound good when you're ranking the states. Mr. Watkins, the head of the Department of Mental Health, says himself through a recent task force that we're probably $200 million short in funds. And of course, the governor is trying to keep the taxpayers happy. I think he does well. I think we're ranked second or third as far as departments in the state, corrections and education and mental health, I think, are up there. But everybody's underfunded. I mean, there never has been enough money. We're just beginning to realize how much we need, and hopefully with more progress and more advocation for this kind of money nationally, we can do better.
So these lobbying groups that are now really gathering strength and being they're holding politicians accountable, could be a wonderful avenue for the mental health programs.
They'd be very good. And this spring I talked at least to each one in Michigan, and I was surprised. I like what I see.
Oh, that's terrific. You know, I guess what I want you to do is look into a crystal ball, Dr. Sullivan, and tell me what you see in the future from the progress that you're making now. What are some of the, if I can say, perks that you're looking for?
Okay, well, this last century, we've seen so many advances in the major medical illnesses. And I think as we go into the 21st century, we're going to identify the cause of the major mental illnesses. And it's going to be very exciting. We're going to be able to control, I'm not saying cure, but at least control, so that people can have more productive lives. So we're very excited about this last decade, and I hope that maybe we'll reach a real milestone.
I think we all share your thoughts, because here we just touched briefly on the amount of time and dollars lost by absenteeism, about the many people in hospitals with mental illness who could be helped if they were properly diagnosed and serviced by the community, that it just makes a lot of sense that we should have adequate funding. Dr. Sullivan, I'm so glad that you could be with us, and I know you're going to stay on so that we can continue this discussion with a parent who has a child with mental illness. Thank you again, Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Johanna.
The harvest has come in, and we're anticipating fall, a relief from the hot summer weather we experience. In our lives, we also experience change, and many times we fear it instead of embracing it. With us today are guests who have embraced change in a most wonderful way, and we're delighted that William Heil, pastor of Immanuel Lutheran Church, and Pamela Dickerson, the church community worker at Immanuel, could be with us, and later on also some of the women from the Guild of Immanuel, to talk about how change has affected Immanuel Lutheran Church. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Pastor Heil, historically, Immanuel was considered the Swedish Lutheran Church, wasn't it?
I think that's true. Back in its formative years, which would be almost 70 years ago now, it served primarily people who are recent immigrants from Sweden or the first generation children of those immigrants from an earlier time.
What attracted them to this particular church? Was it like a magnet church for the Swedish immigrants?
I think for Swedish immigrants and their children living on the east side of Detroit and in the suburbs toward the eastern side of Detroit, it was a natural gathering spot because, at least in the early years, the services were carried on in their own language. Traditions that were important to them were preserved by the church. And, of course, the friendships that they had developed in arriving in the New World were part of the glue that bound the church together.
You know, when you said about bringing their own traditions, I mean, one can say we have them right before us, a lot of them. But what were some of the traditions that the church continued here in this country?
For many years, we continued the celebration of the Lucia Festival, which is dear to the hearts of many Swedish people. It ushers in the Christmas season with pageantry and legend and just people having a good time together. And it's a tradition that we kept alive for many years. We continue to have a Julata service, which is an early morning Christmas service. I'm told that in Sweden they start that at 5 a.m. We're a little bit more lazy and started at 7 a.m. on Christmas Day. But that's a service that's in Swedish. And we've also preserved something, I don't know just how Swedish it is, but that's our Holiday Mart. And many handicrafts and other things from Sweden are part of that Holiday Mart experience.
Now, with all of this background, were you, like, anointed to come to the church because you're a Swede? Or, I guess I would have to say, when did you arrive on the scene?
I arrived in Immanuel in the beginning of 1980. And I didn't come from that Swedish Lutheran tradition. I came from a different tradition within Lutheranism. But I must admit that I found those traditions at Immanuel that were new to me very enjoyable.
Now, as the church became less of a Swedish church and more of an all-inclusive church, how did you manage, and I know it isn't single-handedly, but how did you manage to welcome the new black neighbors that were settling in the area and combine some of their rich traditional cultures as well as keeping what was dear to the hearts of the Swedish cultures that the church had instigated?
First of all, the church was becoming a multi-ethnic church long before I arrived on the scene. And a good 15 years before I came to Detroit, my predecessor, Dr. Constantine Truitt, had been active in evangelism in the neighborhood. Black members started to join, I would think, in the 1960s, so that this was a process that was already underway for a good many years before I came. I think one of the things that we've tried to do throughout the years is to recognize that all of us, regardless of what our background is, have a common need for a Savior, a common need for a church which draws us together around Word and Sacrament, and in which we can be brothers and sisters in Christ. Another thing we've tried to do is to recognize that all people in the Christian family have a valuable tradition of culture, of music, of poetry, of family life that can contribute to the richness and diversity of the tapestry that is the human family at Immanuel.
And with that wonderful introduction, Pam Dickerson, tell us how your family became involved at Immanuel, and I think your evaluation of some of the Swedish traditions that you were able to see and participate in.
Well, my family came to Immanuel in the early 70s, and it was the result of our own church closing. I was raised in a Lutheran church, and we found the people at Immanuel very friendly, very receptive to us, and they were happy to have us share in their Swedish tradition. And we had a real good time doing that.
Well, and tell us, how did you experience some of those, like Pastor Heil spoke of Lucia?
Well, my sisters, I myself was not part of Lucia, but I have sisters who were confirmed at Immanuel. They were part of the Lucia Festival, and my daughter even took part in that.
Is that nice? Mm-hmm. So that really gave you I think it was a broadening experience.
Yes, it was. We learned a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Pastor Heil, when the Swedish tradition was presented to the church at large, how did you and the council have an opportunity to work in some of the wonderful traditions and cultures of the black family and experience?
We went through an intensive planning process and decided as a congregation that our future lay in effective ministry in the neighborhood in which God had placed us. For many black people who, unlike Pam, had not grown up in the Lutheran tradition, our services could seem like a very strange experience walking in the door cold. And we felt that if we could include music as part of our liturgy, as part of our hymns, as part of the anthems done by choir and soloists that come from the black tradition, not only would we enrich our own experience of Christian hymnody and Christian music, but we would also make that worship experience something in which a newcomer coming to our church for the first time would feel at home. A lot of the service might be strange, but here there were a few things that rang familiar chimes.
That gave them an anchor.
Yeah.
You know, I thought of that as I was anticipating this interview with all of you. And we were singing the traditional hymns in church, and I thought of the wonderful gospel music that is available that is really such a musical celebration. There is such a joy and a verve to it, you could say. And I suddenly realized how very, as I saw somebody do at church, we are at times in our singing. How did you do this with your music? I mean, did you have someone at the church that was just able to step in and organize a wonderful music program?
We've been fortunate in having several people who have been members of the congregation who are very gifted in music, one of whom, Margaret Steele, served as our choir director for many years and was conversant with many different styles of music. And we consciously started to utilize not only music from the spiritual and gospel tradition, but in 1983, a coalition of Lutheran churches in the city of Detroit sponsored the writing of a musical setting of the Lutheran liturgy set to gospel music. And we immediately started learning that and using that on occasional services. Now we're using it about half the time. We alternate weekly. One of the men who wrote that service, the music for it, became our director of music a couple of years ago, Dr. James Harris. And under his leadership, we have continued to increase the variety and use of all different kinds of music, and especially gospel music.
I have to tell you, that was quite a coup for the church, wasn't it? Because Dr. Harris's reputation must have preceded him, because he certainly is well known in the community as a leader in musical events. And Pam, I have to direct my next question at you. Now, here you are, a relative newcomer to Immanuel, although in the tradition of the Lutheran Church, and you're a wife and mother, and suddenly you take on new responsibilities. What were those responsibilities?
Well, my responsibilities as the church community worker is to serve as the liaison between the church and community. And I am active in the Chandler Park Neighborhood Association, which it operates out of the church. And I'm able to incorporate that pretty easily into my family life. My family has come to expect me to be gone a lot, so and they have tried to help us.
Pam, if you had not added that, I would have said. You know, but even before that, I think you didn't just come to Immanuel and become the church community worker. You were active in the church in many different phases. If I recall that you were the representative to a convention, and is this what started your interest in serving the church in a broader dimension?
Yes, I think so. I usually try to help out where I'm asked, and it seems that I was almost on every committee and the church council and everything, so I decided. But it's good for me, though.
Pastor Heil, here Pam is being a marvelous liaison with the neighborhood and with the associations. Are there programs that the church offers specifically, let's say, for youth, whether they're members of the church or not?
Yes, we have our own youth group, which is open to all people of teenage years. We also sponsor a YMCA satellite program that meets at the church 3 afternoons and evenings a week, featuring crafts, tutoring, and basketball, and that draws a large number of young people from the community. We have a very intensive Vacation Bible School and Summer program that we mount each year, and very specifically try to reach out through those programs to unchurched young people in our community. We're on the threshold of trying to begin a drug education and drug prevention program that is aimed at youth. So increasingly we are trying to serve the youth of our community and their families too.
That's wonderful. You know, have there been any carryovers on the Swedish traditions? Like here we see all these wonderful items in front of us. Is there still a like a holiday mart time?
Yes, we have the Holiday Mart every year, and it's been going strong. It's this year it's November 4th, next Friday, and the ladies have made a lot of nice things for us to
Do you
see.
think those women would let us preview some of their items?
I'm sure they would.
You think we could do that?
I'm sure they'd be disappointed if you didn't.
Spoken like a true pastor. Thank you for joining us. I think we're going to let the ladies take over and show us some of their wares. We're delighted that Pastor Heil and Pam Dickerson told us that you would allow us to preview some of your wares. And we're delighted. Ruth Engel to my left, and on my far left is Ruth Warner, the president of the Women's Guild of Immanuel Lutheran Church. Thank you for coming. You know, before we get into the fair items, could you tell us a little about your costume, Ruth, or is it a national dress, or just what is it?
It's really the dress, or the dress-up dress, of one of the provinces of Sweden called Dalarna. And Sweden is divided up into provinces, much as we have counties within our state. And each province has its own style of dress, and but most of them are a little bit like this one, with a skirt, an apron that may be decorated or striped, a vest, a blouse, a scarf, and usually a hat.
And lots of embroidery.
Some of them have embroidery, and especially this particular province, which is a very artistic province. From this province comes one of the great artists of Sweden named Carl Larsson. And we do have note cards that do have his paintings upon them. In other places you can purchase, you know, large pictures, but we do have these note cards.
Is he considered primarily a family artist? Because I do see that children are represented in his pictures or his paintings, and it's always a warm family-type situation.
Yes, he painted pictures of the area in which he lived, the outdoors, and family situations.
You know, when I see the horses standing on the table, Ruth Engel, are those also from this particular area?
From this province, you will find woodmakers making the Dalarna horses. It's the only area in Sweden that makes these horses.
Is there any significance to the decoration of the horses? Is it like the hem on your apron?
Well, those colors are typical, although some new ones are being made with blue as instead of orange. But yes, they're colorful. Even homes in Dalarna, they might look plain on the outside, but inside the walls are decorated in very bright colors.
Well, that is interesting.
Even murals around.
You know, before we touch on all these other things, which I certainly want to get to, I'd like to direct the next question to Ruth Werner. As president of the Guild, Ruth Werner, what is the money or the profits from the Holiday Mart earmarked for?
One of our projects will be to refurnish our friendship room.
That's quite an undertaking. Now, you mean to tell me that one of your projects from the proceeds of this fair will do that as well as other projects?
Yes, that is right.
You sound like an ambitious group, a hard-working group. Have you ever undertaken something this major before?
Yes, we have, many times, but one time was tremendous. One of our times was the building fund was getting a little low, and a program was initiated as the Legacy of Love. The Guild was approached how we would handle that. So we as a Guild pledged $10,000 to be paid off in 3 years.
$10,000
Yes.
with a membership in the thousands?
Oh, no, hardly. Around 150 women.
Isn't that remarkable? And I guess the next question would be, did you reach your goal?
Yes, we did. We finalized it the last year, and our $10,000 was paid.
Isn't that remarkable? So this is another way of contributing in a very positive way to the upkeep of the church and making certain improvements that are necessary.
Yes, the improvements were a roof and the organ and also the heating plant
My goodness.
and redecorating the complete church.
Boy, we better have you on some committee, Ruth Werner, or all those women. You know, Ruth Engel, could you tell us something about some of these straw ornaments? I mean, we have this wonderful Yule book.
All right, that's one. And we have items like this, plus, some small Yule
Well,
books.
tell us about the straw.
All right, in Sweden, grain is harvested in the fall, and most of the grain is rye, and the remains of the grain would be the stalks of rye. And early residents in Sweden would put these rye stalks on the floor for covering, not only in their barns, but in their homes.
This was before rugs, right?
Before rugs. Now they make lovely rag rugs and rhea rugs. But from the straw that was on the floor, being practical people, they would fashion dolls and little animals for their children. And then when it was Christmas time, they would also make ornaments to hang on their tree.
Could you
Stars and so on.
Could you tell me, though, when I see that, the center one that you're holding, that it's braided, how does straw braid?
If it is wet, it can be braided. And the same would be true of our Christmas goat. He also has braided horns. We have a large one on the floor. They come in various sizes, even as small as one to hang on the tree. And this Christmas goat now is used all the time to symbolize the bringing of gifts to the children, just like our reindeer does in our country.
You know, Ruth Werner, I noticed that right in front there is a little Lucia, a wooden Lucia, as well as in back of us we have a wall hanging of Lucia. And Pastor Heil alluded to that. Could you tell us a little about Lucia?
St. Lucia ushers in the Christmas season, December the 13th.
Ah,
And the tradition of St. Lucia would be characterized in the eldest daughter of the household, who would take a tray of tea, coffee, and goodies to their parents. She would be dressed in white and have a crown on her head, which was made of wreath and candles. The candles symbolized the light
Oh.
of the light to bring forth the darkness. I mean, the light to carry out the darkness,
Yes,
bring forth the
because
light into the darkness.
Those are the
And
long
as you will
winter
see,
days.
her candles are on top of her head.
Yes. I've got to write that tradition down because I'd certainly like to have somebody serving me coffee and warm rolls and bread.
Wonderful.
Tell us some of the other things, Ruth Engel, that are going to be available.
Well, we have little birds and we have geese.
Geese? I
Geese.
mean, we see geese on everything. Why geese?
Well, in the front of the table is a goose with a little boy on his back.
Does that have significance?
It certainly does in Swedish families because a very well-known children's story deals with a little boy named Nils Holgersson who was converted from being a normal-sized boy to a little boy, and he climbed on the back of this goose and flew all over Sweden. It was really a travel tour for him and for the person who reads the story also. And this book was written by Selma Lagerlöf, who later on won the Nobel Prize for Literature.
You have to tell us what happened to that little boy. Did he always stay tiny?
No,
or was he?
No, he did some very good deed later on, and he was converted back to being a normal-sized boy.
Oh,
and
phew.
after that, he learned to be very good.
That's
And he obeyed the Tumti who had converted him into being small.
wonderful. Now, when you mention the Tumti, now they're standing directly in front of us holding two candles, and they have a little stocking cap on and a beard. Tell us about the Tumtis.
All right, and there are Tumtis behind me. And a long time ago, Tumtis were just little gray elves that lived in your house or on your property, and it was very desirable to have them around. And they kept the family in line, really. And
Gee, we all need
oh, yes, if you did something bad or swore, they would knock on the wall to remind you. And, but in the late in the late 1890s, one of the illustrators of a children's book that was dealing with Tumtis illustrated him with this red stocking cap and the white beard. And everyone in the country just fell in love with this little character, and so ever since, Tumtis have been illustrated that way. And at Christmas time, he's the one who brings the gifts to the children, and all he asks is a little bowl of porridge, rice porridge, and it's gone in the morning.
Well, that's
If the
little
children leave
enough
it.
if he leaves something good, right? Ruth Werner, then here we have all these wonderful things, and I noticed particularly the Christmas tree with candles. Tell us how that's going to be used.
That will be used as a centerpiece at our luncheon table.
Oh, how lovely.
And there will be a little skirt underneath the tree, a red skirt with braid, and it will sit on there. After the luncheon, the trees will be sold, all intact, the skirt.
Candles, skirt, and
Yes,
tree. Oh,
yes.
that's, well, now, after the luncheon, now, when is this Holiday Mart?
It's going to be on November the 4th.
A week from tomorrow.
That is right. It will start at 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock, or until...
Everything's sold.
And the tickets for the luncheon will be $4 and for adults, and a child's ticket is $1.50.
Oh, are you going to just have one mass luncheon, or are there going to be various seatings?
We will have the seatings at 11:15 and at 12:30.
Oh, well, that's handy for people who are pressed for a time at a lunch hour. And I think what we should say is that it's going to be at Immanuel Lutheran Church.
Yes, at Chandler Park Drive in Dickerson.
And I wondered how we make reservations. Is there
By
some
calling our church office.
Ah,
And that number is 881
821?
821 2380.
Listen, we're also used to giving our own phone numbers. Let's say that again, Bruce. This is your test.
821-2380.
Oh, that sounds terrific. You certainly have brought so many lovely things. I see right in the front, Ruth Werner, you have some wooden ornament, Ruth Engel. You have wooden ornaments, a pig and a bird and an apple. Is this significant too?
Well, only in that they're made out of wood, and as I said before, there are a lot of forests in Sweden to make all of these wooden items, and we have a lot of wood crafters there, and those ornaments are small and they're colorful,
Right.
and pigs are used at Christmas time a lot for eating.
You know what I wanted to ask, though? All these are imported things.
Right.
Are the women of the church also going to be making handcrafted things?
Many, many things.
So
will
there's
be.
going to be a nice balance between handcrafted and imported.
Every
Right.
circle will be represented
Oh, that's
with all other goodies and that. And I would like to say, if it wasn't for the deep dedication of our women at Immanuel, that is what brings us to success.
I think one could say that the women of the world are really impressive, right?
Right.
We're delighted that Ruth Werner, president of the Guild of Immanuel Lutheran Church, and Ruth Engel could be here with us to finish off the segment on the Holiday Mart. And if all of you have been as entranced with all of these things as I have, you will be there November 4th, 10 to 2, Immanuel Lutheran Church, Chandler Park Drive in Dickerson, 821-2380 for reservations on the luncheon. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Really tired of all the political speeches, the debates, the polls that were already predicting the results of the presidential race 2 weeks ago. So today we're not going to speak politics. Instead, we're going to focus on a young adult. He went through the Grosse Pointe school system. His parents were residents here until they were transferred to another city. And he has an interesting and exciting vocation. With us today is Christopher Wallace, or as we'll call him, Chris Wallace, and he's going to tell us about his job. Chris, I guess if I were going to interview you as a political candidate, I would want to know everything about you. And I'm sure you're as relieved as I that we're not going to discuss all those things. But I would like to know, what started your love affair with flying?
I've always loved flying since I was a little kid. Just something that I've always enjoyed. It's been a hobby, and I went to college and did it as a profession.
Well, but you know, I'm thinking of one of our boys, I think around the 4th grade. He was going to be a fireman, and we visited the city firehouse, and we got books out of the library. And then in the 5th grade, he went into another phase. Did this ever happen to you?
Not for a long time. In high school, I wanted to go into architecture, drafting, and then flying still was very active, and I decided to go into flying as a profession.
Well, I think that sounds wonderful, but I wonder, though, did your parents feel that this would be like a passing phase, as our son's ambition to be a fireman and a postman and a rubbish collector was his particular interest in the early years?
I thought at first it was, but they saw I persisted in aviation quite a bit, and they supported it highly. They were very happy that's what I wanted to do, and they're still very happy.
You know, Chris, I guess I'm I have the mind of an inquiring mother as opposed to an interviewer, because here you are as a youngster, and you express this love of flying. Did you have any other hobbies, or did your family kind of want to direct your interests into a variety of opportunities as opposed to focusing in on just this one interest?
Well, I've always played music. My mother plays the violin, my sister plays violin, and I play the French horn in the Grosse Pointe Symphony, and I've always loved it. It's another one of my favorite pastimes is music, and I also build airplanes and ships.
Can you see the relief on my face as I think your parents did well by you, or you did well by your parents' training? You said you played in the Grosse Pointe Symphony?
Yes, French horn.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you're a balanced life, in other words. And I can imagine our viewers are thinking, what is she talking about, the Grosse Pointe Symphony and other interests, when they're standing by a plane, obviously at the airport. So let's switch over now to where are we at and what are we doing here, Chris Wallace?
This is Detroit City Airport. We're in the old base here at City Airport. These old hangars have been here since 1930, and they've been here a long time.
Not quite that long, Chris, when in the relative speaking of things. What kind of a plane is this? I mean, I see propellers. Is this still one of those prop planes?
Well, it's called the Cessna Conquest. It's a turboprop, meaning that it has a jet engine for its primary power, and the propeller is for its thrust. They call it a turboprop.
How did you get started in flying? I mean, we've discussed your interests, but were you taking any classes that reflected directly on your interest in flying, let's say, at any point in the Grosse Pointe school system?
Well, I took the aviation ground school at North High School as one of my regular classes, and that helped me out quite a bit to get started. And I graduated from high school. Went up to Northwestern Michigan College.
Well, just a minute. We've got to cover. I didn't realize that North even had any classes on aviation. Who taught the class, and what were you taught?
John Harold is the instructor, and he teaches basics of flying, ground school, and the weather and regulations, operations of the airplane, things like that, just to give you an idea of how an airplane and how aviation itself works.
After you graduated from North High, were you still convinced that you really wanted to pursue it? I know you said you were going up to northern Michigan for training. What school was that?
Northwestern Michigan College, Traverse City, Michigan.
What kind of curriculum do they have?
They teach everything from private, commercial instrument, flight instructor classes, and you get a multi-engine, meaning this is a multi-engine airplane with 2 engines or more. And they have all the ground schools with each of the courses that offer.
When I think of the school, is this the same school that I'm thinking of that trains a lot of missionaries when they have their training, like on making very short runway stops in Africa and around the world?
The school you're talking about is Grand Rapids School of Bible and Music. That's right by Grand Rapids. The school I went to, aviation was one of the major courses, and there was a Maritime Academy and a few other major classes also.
When I think of flying, and since I'm not a pilot, I think that there would be physics and meteorology and all sorts of other subjects as opposed to just knowing how a plane operates. Like, I'm thinking of a car. I mean, you don't have to know what's under the hood to precisely take care of a car, but in flying, I would think that there would be a difference.
You have to know what is going on with the aircraft. Weather is a major thing in our business. Besides weather, they teach us about all the regulations and all the laws that apply to aviation. We also have to know how the aircraft flies, to say what's under the hood. We don't know how this engine works. If something happens, we know how to solve the problem. We go through a checklist, which is a very big thing they teach us in flying. You know,
since we can take a picture of the instrument panel, can you describe some of the things that you have to be aware of as you're sitting in the cockpit of the plane?
Well, everything in the cockpit is major. We have the flight instruments, which tells us what the aircraft is doing, whether it's climbing or turning. We got engine instruments that tells us how the engine is running at certain power settings. We have navigation radios that tell us how to go from point A to point B. And we have weather radar to show us where, let's say, the bad weather. Our radar in the airplane is primarily showing where all the rain is. It's not like not a thunderstorm detector. It just shows us where the heavy rain is. And autopilot thing, and a few other items. But we check everything as we fly, and no matter what phase of flight we're takeoff or landing or cruise.
Can you read those numbers?
I guess one of the mysteries of flying that has always intrigued me, I mean, here in the highway, when you're driving a car, you see a lot of markers, like it says 13-mile road, or it says I-94. Do you have that same kind of a guideline in the air?
Between the checkpoints A and B, we have called intersections, much like road intersections, and there are distances, and we time them to get our ground speed and our gas consumption.
Well, but how do you get from point A to B? I mean, are there markers up there that say?
We have our charts that shows us where to go from point A to point B, and I'll show you those in a few minutes.
Oh, that would be nice, because I certainly would like to have some idea that when I'm flying from here to Denver, that the pilot has some kind of a guideline. We were talking about weather. Weather being so unpredictable that you can't even, well, when we hear the 11 o'clock news, you know, they might say that tomorrow it's going to rain, and it turns out to be a very, very pleasant and sunny day. Doesn't this cause problems? And if it does, how do you avert them other than staying on the ground?
We get a very thorough briefing when we call the flight service or the weatherman, and he tells us where it's at, and we pick the routing that we want to go from point A to point B. I don't watch the 11 o'clock news. I watch the Weather Channel in the morning, and they're essentially a National Weather Service, and they give me an idea, a better idea, how the weather is going to be out there.
I do believe that's a cable station. Is that right? I mean, we have to be supportive. The other thing that I'm going to ask you, Chris, is you graduated from the school, but what did you graduate with? What kind of a degree did you get, and what kind of requirements were necessary for you to acquire this degree?
Well, the degree is an Associate of Applied Science Career Pilot Program, and besides the major, you take all the basic courses, English, math, and some science. Nothing like physics. You can as an option, but physics is not really required.
Well, now, did that qualify you then to become a pilot?
Well, then, besides the flying, you prepare with your instructor all the flying and all the groundwork, and then you take a check ride with an examiner, and he passes you or fails you based on your performance flying the airplane.
Isn't there a requirement that you need like 100 hours or some kind of airtime in order to certify as a pilot license?
For the private license, 40 hours is a minimum, and half of that is 20 hours is with an instructor, and then there's a few other items that you do to get qualified.
Now, you not only have one degree that certifies you as a pilot of a private plane, but you have several other degrees. Could you tell us how, or certifications, I guess you'd call them. Could you tell us how you acquired these other certifications?
I'll start with a private license, and then to get the commercial and instrument, you have to have 190 hours or 200 hours, depending on the program you go through. And that's just doing cross-country and doing a lot of air work practice and taking the check ride. And then there's a flight instructor, and there are 3 different types of instructor ratings. That's just an addition to your license, and that enables you to teach other pilots how to fly.
Have you done this?
Yes, I have. I have an instructor license in my pocket.
Where did you teach flying? Was it like at City Airport here, or was it in connection with school?
I actually got my first job teaching at Pontiac before I graduated from school. I taught up at Pontiac for 1.5 years, and then moved out of state. I taught for 4 years, and then I moved back up here to the Detroit area to fly this airplane.
You know, Chris, here's another mother-only type of an example. When our children, and we have 6 of them, started learning how to drive, my husband thought it would be great if I would take them on their road, get some road experience. And I thought those experiences were some of the most hair-raising I'd ever had. Now, I think in a car, you know, that's one thing. You can always say to them, step on the brake or turn or some other motivated command. But in the air with a student, when, you know, they could go into a spin, or am I over-dramatizing that?
Well, it's a little more than, it's not as bad as you think it is. I haven't had too many bad experiences. I've had some interesting experiences. I got stuck up in Traverse City for 3 days, never made it home because it was snowing so bad. I ended up staying in the weather station for overnight because there was no available area to go to. Make a path so I can move my airplane to a better parking spot instead of out in the middle of everywhere. So I spent the night and made it back home the next morning.
Oh, gee. Well, I think that's a weather experience, but did you have any interesting, as you called it, experiences with a student?
Several, and it'd take about 2 hours to tell you.
But just tell us one short one then.
I had a student that just really didn't learn, and she just was not instructor material, and it took another 20 hours of ground school on top of what she had, and another 7-8 hours of flying before she was a flight instructor. And she was the kind of person I pulled every trick out of the book and then some to get her to qualify. She did very well on her check ride, and she did well, and then now she's flying for a commuter airline out of Dayton, Ohio.
Oh my goodness. So in other words, she was the kind that you did not want to meet in the sky, and if she was determined, you were going to make sure she was well trained.
Yes, yeah.
When you fly, you graduated from college, and now you have your flight certification, and you've become a flight instructor. After you graduated, did you just say, "Here, world, here I am," and jobs just kept pouring in?
No, in aviation world and probably other careers, it's all word of mouth. The job I had down up at Pontiac, I heard from another instructor up at school in Traverse City, and I called and had an interview that weekend and started that following Monday. When I moved out of state, I had to do some walking around, but I managed to get a position as an instructor, and then I got to know the area, and I started to know a few people, and I got a job down there, also doing some charter and some underground pipeline patrol for the gas company. And
underground pipeline? How does one manage to do that?
It's all done by markers in the off the roads and out in the woods. They have these markers, and you follow it, and it's an underground pipeline. It's a gas line, natural gas, and all we're doing is looking for leaks in the line and anybody that's digging, because there can be a potential explosion.
But you know, Chris, I guess I'm confused here. If you're checking on these pipelines and they're underground, and you just said that you're checking for leaks, and there you are flying at 2,000 feet, how are you going to spot them?
Well, we're actually flying 500 feet off the ground, which is...
You mean treetop?
Well, not so much treetop, but it's legal minimum altitude to fly. You can see quite a bit at 500 feet. It's more than you think it is. And,
does the gas give off some discoloration or something that you could...
No, it's the grass dies.
Oh.
The grass dies, and you can tell there's a leak. It's a circle, and if it's been there a while, it turns into an oval. But after flying it a little enough, you get to see what's going on, you know, where the leaks and if they've been fixed, things like that.
Chris, I don't think you're giving us the full picture of what you did for a job, because I do remember that what you did at first wasn't all that glamorous.
The first job I had was with Aerodynamics Incorporated. That's the Beechcraft dealer up at Pontiac. It was my first instructor job. And then when I moved out of state, moved on to fly for Ohio State University.
Ohio State? Hiss, boo!
Well, that's what everybody else said when I moved down there. You're not the only one. They have a very good flight program down there. They had offered a few more courses, aerospace and a lot of physics-oriented aviation program. Taught for them for 4 years, did some charter work with them, flying a twin-engine airplane. Then I got a job at another airport there in Columbus, Lane Aviation, another charter firm. Did that for a year and a half, flying twin-engine airplanes, very similar to this airplane, but not turbine.
Now we're saying charter service. What does that really mean?
People call me and say, I want to go to Florida. They want a trip to go to Florida, and they hire me with the airplane, and they pay per hour on the airplane and the time I'm on the ground. It's a day trip.
Oh my goodness. Oh, okay. Now you're doing charter service, but you're thinking you probably have to earn a lot more money to pay the rent, huh?
Yes, flying charter and teaching combine the two, you get fairly good pay, and you can make ends meet. It's a very good field. I enjoy it.
Then you also went into freight delivery. Wasn't that one of your earlier careers in flying?
Yes. When I moved back up to Michigan, I flew checks for the banks, canceled checks, and
that doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. The pay is real good, and you fly this. It's like an airline. You have a schedule. You fly every week, 5 days a week, and you're off on the weekends. And most of it's nighttime. I had the only day run in the whole system, so I had day hours. It was a full day of flying. Did that for 6 months. I got out of that because I had a better job offer flying bigger airplanes back down in Columbus for another couple years.
You know, Chris, I'm just amazed. I mean, when you say you were flying a whatever small airplane first, and now you're into bigger aircraft, wouldn't you have to take additional lessons, or is a plane a plane?
Well, this airplane that I'm flying, you have to go to school. The initial training takes 5 days, and they teach everything from strut pressure all the way up to very complicated flight maneuvers. You go through a lot of emergency situations that are simulated. You do these in a flight simulator, and what they do is simulate an engine failure, or they'll simulate an engine fire. And the cockpit is set up exactly like the airplane you fly, and it's just like getting in a real airplane. Once you get involved, they really pull a lot of things as far as an engine or systems failures like that. And then once you get out of it and you climb in this airplane, it's really no big deal, because you've come out of a simulator exactly like this into the airplane, and it's really an easy transition.
Personally speaking, I think I'd rather have the pilot have hands-on experience on the airplane instead of just in a simulator. I'd want him to know all the ins and outs of the weather and all this other training. So now you always have to update your training if you're going to go into a different type of an aircraft. Is that right?
Yes. Every 12 months you have to take a mandatory recurrent training for the aircraft to iron out any problems that have occurred over the year that you're not aware of, and also updating maybe some new procedure on the aircraft. No matter anything with jet engines on it, or like a turboprop, they recommend, and sometimes it is required, you must go to school to get recurrent on the airplane.
You know, one of the interesting things that you mentioned to me, Chris, when we were talking, you said that you could also fly instrument. Now, apparently you had to then, I mean, here you're telling us that you have to go to school and catch up on different things that, improvements that have been made on aircraft. How did you acquire your instrumentation license?
Well, again, it's going through ground school, and they teach everything basics as far as pitch, roll, and attitude, just attitude flying, aircraft attitude, and regulations. It's all a new license. Meteorology is a big thing, because you're flying in the clouds, and you must know what's going to happen in the next hour if you're going to fly on the gauges, so to speak.
You know, just tell us quickly about your experience where it was snowing, but it was also thunder and lightning.
It's a rare or strange weather phenomenon that does occur from time to time. I was flying checks this particular night, going up to Saginaw from Detroit City, and I saw off my left wing some lightning, or I should say flashes of lightning, and I had to get up to Saginaw before that hit, and I made it in time, and another 20 minutes later, the storm went over, and the flashes were off the left side. As I landed, when I took off, went back down to Detroit, flashes are off my left side still, and the storm went over very quickly. I was on the ground for about 35, 40 minutes, just getting rid of freight.
Oh, gosh, that would be kind of frightening. You know, let's talk about the plane that we're standing in front of. If you're flying to a destination, how far can you go without tanking up again? I mean, what is your distance in a plane like this?
This airplane, we can top the tanks off and go all the way down to Florida nonstop. And we can
Non-stop to Florida?
Mm-hmm. And we can tank up again, come back nonstop again. West Coast, we can make that a one-stop because of the winds, which is in the wintertime very strong, and in the summertime not as strong, but you still have to make one stop. We can make it back from the West Coast, say Los Angeles, nonstop.
Gosh, that's incredible. You know, do you mind showing us, we've seen the instrument panel, but I'd like to see the inside of the plane. Just, can we take a picture of the inside of the plane? And then could you just tell us, like, how many people it would seat and comfortably and what you do on a long trip? Let's just take a peek.
Okay. But
This is really impressive. I don't see how you can keep your mind on flying, much less all these instruments. Could you give us a clue as to what's going on from left to right?
Okay. These are the flight instruments that tell you what the aircraft is doing. Airspeed, attitude instrument tells you whether you're climbing and turning. This is an altimeter, tells you how far or how high you are. Not off the ground, just how high you are. This is called a heading indicator. This is a little more complicated. It's called a HSI, horizontal situation indicator. It tells you everything the airplane is doing. Course-wise, it's got a glide slope if you're shooting an ILS. Another navigation radio. Vertical speed tells you how fast you're climbing and descending. Engine instruments here. This is all your radio equipment. This is the weather radar over here. And on the right side is just a duplicate set of instruments. The power levers, condition levers for the turbine engine, one for each side. Autopilot, and there's a called a LORAN. It's the same kind of unit used in maritime. And the pressurization controls over here. Then we've got circuit breakers and switches on each side of the cockpit for different features. We got, I'll say, anti-ice, and we've got light switches and circuit breakers for everything in this aircraft.
You know, Chris, when you read about a chart that you have to go down and make sure that everything has been tested, I can see where this would be necessary.
Yes. We run a checklist, make sure everything is running properly, make sure that the flaps are down and we've got proper power and our anti-ice system is working properly. So we run the checklist every time we fly, whether we're taxiing out, climbing, descending, landing, and shutting down. We actually use a checklist.
That's terrific. Thanks so much. I really appreciate just sitting here and seeing what actually is in the cockpit of a plane. That's really interesting. I think it's almost it's so cozy looking, and it really looks very comfortable. I appreciate your just letting us come in and take a peek around. Have you ever flown as a passenger?
Just on the airlines, that's it.
Not in the plane that you're flying. I think it's incredible that as a youngster, and here we have a picture of you as just a young fellow with the standing right next to an airplane, that you really did pursue it. Here I ask if your family was guiding you and supporting you, but was there anyone in your family that really had this aviation bug like you did?
My grandfather, he was an air traffic controller at Boston 20 years ago. He's the only one.
Air traffic controller? I mean, he was really in that high-pressure, stressful situation. Did he encourage you too?
No, he just watched me go through it. He was very happy that I continued in the aviation program because we both had something in common, and we talked a lot about flying and just stories and things of that nature.
What do you see for yourself and down the road? Are you going to pursue this? What avenues can you further explore in this career?
Well, I can continue on down on the corporate sector, fly for like GM or Sears. Telephone companies have their own aircraft. Or I can fly major carriers like United, American Airlines. But that'll have to, I'm not too sure yet. That'll be another few years yet before I make a decision.
Is this something, though, that you really want to go in? Because it sounds to me like you really enjoy this job as you're working away and just enjoying what you're doing.
I enjoy it no matter what I do, if it's corporate or airlines.
That's terrific. I think it's wonderful. I hope the school board is all watching to realize how diversified the school offerings are in Grosse Pointe. We have a young fellow here that is in the career of his choice because of his own interest, but also of Grosse Pointe North's direction. Thank you, Chris Wallace, for being with us.
Thank you, Mrs. Gilbert.